Good morning, everybody. Hello and welcome. We'll just wait a few more minutes for people to arrive and then we'll make a start. And welcome to our webinar, which is Riding the Roller Coaster, where we'll be focusing on ethics, emotions, participants, and the self. I'm absolutely delighted to have you all joining us today, and we'll have time for questions at the end of the session. So please do keep typing questions into the chats as we go through. I'm Ada Hoy, and I'm the head of research at the Royal College of Nursing. And our webinar today will focus on all things around ethics, inclusion, researcher wellbeing, and participants. So the outline of our webinar today is I'll be doing a bit of an introduction to the theme of ethics. We'll have a presentation from Dr. Eliza Khan, and this will be followed by panel discussions with Hannah Cadogan, Professor Roxanne Crosby-Nwobi, Dr. Ellie Gordon, and Dr. Dorothy Kupara. So over this webinar series focused on research, we've looked at the different research processes, from finding and choosing a topic and having that real focus on your topic, to thinking about what we know about that field already. So thinking about what do we know about the background to the topic, how have your experiences shaped that topic, and what the literature tells us. So by doing a literature review, we can identify what's been done already on that topic, what the evidence is, and we can also identify those different gaps in knowledge as well, which can really help us then shape what our research questions, aims, and objectives are. We then think about the different research designs and methods. So how are we going to go about approaching our research study? So whether this is quantitative, qualitative, whether we're using surveys, questionnaires, whether it's a clinical trial, for example, or whether we're using qualitative methods such as interviews, focus groups, and asking people those wider, open, broader questions. Today's session is focusing about ethics, and during that research process, we often talk about the importance of ethical approvals. But actually, ethics spans the whole research process. It's not just about getting that ethical approval in place, but thinking about how we really manage all of those different ethical considerations throughout that research process, right from the very beginning to the very end. So this is also around how we go about analysing that data, ensuring that the data and findings that we have are supported by what people say and what the data tells us, rather than imposing any of our preconceived ideas or assumptions. We then think about writing, so writing for dissemination or writing a report, publication, whatever that might look like, and thinking about how we then tell people about the findings, so really creating that impact and influencing change through what we found. So when we think about research ethics more closely, we often think about, well, what is the purpose of the research study in place? And do the benefits outweigh the risks of conducting the study? And a lot of the time when we think about research, the benefits of the people taking part is not always immediate. So the people taking part in our research study don't always benefit straight away. It's often later down the line that people can begin benefiting from what we find. So thinking about how do we mitigate those risks, and how do we get the most benefit out of the research that we do? We might also need to consider who is involved in the research that we're conducting, so whether it involves children and young people or even vulnerable populations. So for myself, a lot of my research has been focused around mental health, for example, and working with people from marginalised, underserved and underrepresented communities. So how do we think about including people and making research genuinely inclusive? Also thinking about how we involve and include patients and public within the research that we do. And we'll be talking about this in more detail with our panellists later. Thinking about how we get genuine informed consent through the work that we do. And also thinking about internet and social media use. So particularly in the modern day and age when internet and social media is used so much, thinking about how do we go about promoting the research that we're doing, and what platforms do we use that is ethical. And if we're thinking about, for example, documentary analysis, so thinking about analysing documents, that could be on social media, thinking about, well, what does that mean in terms of consent? Have people given their permission to be, for their live social media post to be used for the purpose of research, even though it's in the public domain? Thinking also about anonymity and confidentiality, especially when we're working with, really, really niche groups of people, thinking about how we ensure their safety. And also thinking about how we store our data or how we might share our data that's in ethical ways. And ensuring that people have the right to withdraw from our research study as well. That's really important. But also thinking about what happens when people withdraw. So what happens to the data that's already been collected? Is that going to be continue to be used as part of the research study? Or what have been those agreements that have been put in place when people consent to taking part? These are just some of the aspects that we have to think about when it comes to ethics. When we move on to thinking about participants, it's also important to ensure that all the research that we do or the information that we share is absolutely accessible. So that can be in a written form and ensuring that the written language is accessible to patients, public and the participants. And that's right from the information sheets that we share about the study right through to the findings. So sharing those in accessible formats. And considering alternative formats of sharing information as well, for example, whether it's through podcasts, whether it's through kind of artistic, creative means, or more non-traditional means that don't involve text, for example. I've mentioned the importance of including participants and making sure that research is inclusive. I know that Elisa will be talking more about this during her presentation. And also thinking about the potential to do harm. So what happens when we're researching sensitive topics that have the potential to either create trauma or re-traumatize people when they're talking about their stories, their narratives and their previous experiences, and what support we might offer and put into place to mitigate that. So thinking about all of these things in relation to participants is part of that ethical process of doing research. We also need to consider our relationships with people. That can be the participants themselves. So what is the relationship between the researcher and the participant? But also, particularly when we're doing group research, such as through focus groups, where we have a group of people all talking about the predefined topic, thinking about, well, what are those relationships between those people in the room as well? And that can be related to, for example, power dynamics, or it can be related to if somebody is talking over each other or one person is dominating the room, thinking about how do we manage those different dynamics within that space. Also thinking about our relationships with the data and what we find. So we might start a study by thinking about this is exactly what I want to look at. But actually being open to new ideas becomes really important as well, so that we can challenge our own assumptions and our own knowledge, our own preconceived ideas. So thinking about how we maintain that openness to new learning. Also thinking about our positionality. So thinking about, where we position ourselves within that research, whether that's as a nurse, a midwife, a researcher, but also thinking that we are also human, and that's the crux of all the research that we do. We're working with people. It's important that we are open and transparent about our positionality and our experiences that might influence how we see things. So what is our positionality? What is the lens that we're using to look at this data? Preparing for the unexpected. So research is always a nebulous process and things will crop up that we do not expect. So preparing for that as well. And ensuring that the support is in place, not only for the participants, for anything that becomes unexpected, but also for ourselves as researchers as well. So when we think about looking after ourselves as researchers, thinking about our own well-being. So when we're thinking about researching sensitive topics, things might come up that are distressing, unexpected, and thinking about how our own emotions are managed within that space. Thinking about what it's like, not only in the moment when we might be shocked at what we hear, for example, but also thinking about how we manage when we revisit that data. So when we're analysing that data, we're having to revisit that all over again and think about what that's like and how we look after ourselves. And thinking about that research process then as being both intellectual as well as personal. Because I think a lot of the time we talk about and think about research as being that academic knowledge, that intellectual learning, but also thinking about how we're affected personally and thinking about how we grow as individuals through what we find. So I've included a list of resources in this next slide, which I'll put into the chat shortly as well, so you have access to those. And I'll move on to thinking about moving on to Eliza, who'll be talking about her presentation about researching people, from researching people to researching with people. So I'll hand over to Eliza and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Data, I will try to share my screen. Let me just move. Oh gosh, that. Can you all see my screen? Sorry, Ada, I can't hear you any longer. Have I gone on mute?
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you. So thank you, Ada and colleagues, for inviting me here today. Just a little quick introduction about me. My name's Eliza Khan and I'm a registered nurse. And today's focus will be centred around my experience as a doctoral student, as well as an early career researcher and inclusive research practice. So just a little bit about myself then. I'm a mother to three beautiful girls, all at different ages. In the afternoons, I'm spending time with my 15-year-old exploring makeup. And then just before bedtime, I could be reading Dear Zoo. Quite a varied evening with my girls. I'm a registered adult nurse, so my experiences in accident and emergency, followed by specialising in stroke or acute stroke as a clinical nurse specialist and a ward sister on the stroke unit. I am currently an academic at a university in the northwest of England as an assistant professor and programme lead for nursing. And then I have some voluntary roles, as you can see. So just a little bit about me and my research and what drives my research. I would describe myself as being very curious, and I think that's really important as a researcher. So I like to understand why we do the things we do, or why would we give a certain drug over another drug, for example, or whose voices are missing when we're developing strategies, for example. And what I like to do is use that knowledge or my curiosity to develop my knowledge, which then shapes how I am as an academic in terms of disseminating that knowledge to my students or my colleagues, for example, or influencing through policy or research outputs. And ultimately, what I'm doing is looking at the best way to support and care for patients, and then, of course, my students. And my lived experiences of me, my patients, and my students and wider data really does influence who I am as a researcher. And I'd really like to draw your attention to this picture of my beautiful father, who was an inpatient in December 2017. And the time had come for my father to, he was approaching end of life, and I wanted my father to be home to pass away. That was his wishes. So I approached.
Sorry, Lisa. We can't see your, we can only see your first slide. Would you be able to share your?
Oh, sorry, let me try sharing again.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Let's try it again. See if that works. Can you see the screen now?
We can, if you could share this, share the screen where you've got slideshow, because what we're seeing is all the slides.
Oh, I'm definitely sharing. Oh, I'll stop share. Let me try again. Sorry.
Thank you.
Right. So if I click current slide, do you get to see the screen now?
Eliza, we can see it. Can you see in the top left-hand corner? There's a little like a white screen with a green button on your PowerPoint. It says from beginning. I think then it will show as a slideshow rather than we can see like your screen rather than the presentation. Does that make sense?
So slideshow from beginning. Sorry about this. Does that work?
Oh no, that hasn't changed anything. Martine, do you know?
I think the
Has it,
slides are probably
she
coming up
put
on a
you?
different screen. Do you have a multiple screen set up?
I do.
All right.
Um,
So, um, could you, when you're sharing your screen, could you share the screen that your presentation ends up on rather than, yeah, there we go.
okay,
That's
it's
it,
worked.
perfect.
Sorry, we'll carry on. I'm sorry
Thank you.
about this. Note to self, don't use two screens. So yeah, just going back to my father being an inpatient, approaching end of life, I asked if we could get my father home because that was his preferred place of death, which we did. We got my father home, and I phoned the GP practice and said it's approaching a Christmas break. Are you open? Because we're Muslim, and in Islam we require the burial to be pretty immediate. And I was informed they're not open over Christmas, and it was my job to ring every GP practice to find someone who'd be open over Christmas to be able to bury my father if he passed away. And I was very fortunate because there was a practice that was able to accommodate this, and I transferred my father's records across, and they made the visit to prescribe all the anticipatory medications and so on. So that was the first hurdle. And then the second hurdle, sadly, my father passed away on Christmas Day, and there were no services available for me to access the relevant documentation to be able to bury my father. So I didn't meet his wishes or my other religious needs. So what I did was I spent the day, instead of grieving, making phone calls to try and find ways in which I could bury my father the next day even. And there was a service open from 9 o'clock till 10 o'clock on Boxing Day, which where you can get the necessary documentation for burials, and that's what I did find. So off we went, queuing up at 8 o'clock outside the registry office to be able to get the documentation. And I did, and I buried my father the next day. But this really made me reflect on actually where was the voice of the communities when making these decisions to allow a registry office to be open for 1 hour. And this has really shaped who I am, and my father's just everything that's happened is who I am today, I suppose. So in the background, I am working on this with the local council to make some changes. But I am going to move on to my experience as a doctoral researcher. So I started my journey into my doctoral studies in 2020, and I survived a pandemic. I gave birth to two beautiful girls, and I had an absolutely phenomenal journey in terms of growth, self-development, in terms of really exposing myself to things I'd never had the confidence in doing. I'm also the first gen in higher education in my family as well. So I was hitting milestones that I never thought I could even aspire to. My research, which I won't go into too much, focused on professional identity of nursing associates. And I did not choose my research topic. My students brought the topic to me because they were all student nursing associates. And because the role is relatively new in England, they were sharing their experiences. And actually, I felt this needed exploring further. So my experience has always been, I've started as a novice nurse, become an experienced nurse, then went into academia as a novice academic, became a really strong experienced academic, and then I felt vulnerable again as a doctoral student, and I feel I've grown again. So I'm now called an early career researcher. But in terms of my research, participant selection was really important, and I really wanted that representation when selecting the participants. So my study focused on a group of students and meeting them during their time as students, exploring their professional identity within this new role, and then meeting them after a period of registered practice, and again exploring their professional identity after exposure. Because again, talking about representation, I wanted that male-female ratio. I wanted the younger and the mature students. I wanted the different backgrounds. And I was really fortunate that I also had variation in terms of having students from NHS backgrounds to primary and social care, and that's really key as well. Focus group timings were really important. So the first focus group of students was really easy to navigate because there were students and I could slot things into timetables. However, whilst they were in practice, to arrange a focus group was pretty difficult. So as a researcher, again, I informed my students, registered nursing associates, in terms of how would you like to access this focus group, and the preferred method was Zoom. And then interview times being really flexible was really important. They all worked shift patterns, and it was really challenging to arrange a time. However, 8 p.m. was agreed because the day shift nursing associates would complete their shift, have something to eat, meet with their families, and then join at 8 o'clock. And equally, the night shift nursing associates completed handover and made time to join the focus group. So it's really speaking with your participants and what works well. And I actually shared this with another doctoral student who was exploring patients with arthritis, and she fed back that she'd reflected on this, and patients with arthritis can be quite stiff in the morning, so she changed her timings to later on in the afternoon. So it's really considering your participants and their needs as well. During the focus groups, my students and registered nursing associates shared some really sensitive issues they'd experienced in terms of their identity or their role not being recognised. And I carried guilt in this because in one hand, I'm recruiting these students into this course, programme, profession, and then they're sharing their experiences and challenges of the role not being recognised. And that really affected me as a researcher. So what worked for me was having supervision or emotional check-ins with my supervisor, and really debriefing as well as journaling was really important. Another thing I did was I had students attend conferences with me and speak and share. And that's really important as well, because again, we're not just researching them, we're bringing them in. Connecting and networking, LinkedIn worked really well for me. So again, find researchers in your field, expose yourself, just ask. People are more than willing to give you time as well. And some of my work has informed the Royal College of Nursing in terms of policy and scope of practice for nursing associates, and that's something I'm continuing to work on. So my journey after completion of my doctorate, I think my confidence really elevated in terms of research approach, research design. I developed further publications from my doctoral research. Really importantly, I made changes to my curriculum with my team. So we changed the title from trainee nursing associates to student nursing associates, because what we found was the employee identity of the apprenticeship really superseded their student identity, and changing their title to student would give them that student identity. Other things that I introduced was professional identity workshops throughout the programme to help them understand what does it mean to have a professional identity. I also supported the development of the Nursing Associate Ambassador role in local organisations as a buddy system for newly qualified nursing associates to partner with established nursing associates, whilst also navigating a new identity for myself as an early career researcher. And then during a public health module, we were talking about health inequalities. One of my students shared her experiences of how she braids her hair, or she braided her hair before giving birth. And I wanted to understand why she did that. And she said that's because through giving birth, as I'm sweating, etc., my hair can become matted, and there's no comb in the NHS that can go through type C or really coily, curly hair. And I felt guilty because I hadn't considered this in my sort of even peripheral vision as a nurse. And she explained, no, you need to meet my hairdresser because she's got stories that she needs to share. So off I went to meet her hairdresser, who shared stories of patients who have had long stays in intensive care unit, who have textured hair, and leaving intensive care unit, the hair was damaged and matted and required chemical treatments. And she said, well, for women, your hair's your crown. And this is being damaged, and patients in nursing homes with textured hair are dying, and they're dying with matted hair. And actually, I owed it to them to illuminate this overlooked area, and why should care start from the neck down? So I developed a working group with charities, textured hair specialists, barbers, hairdressers, and my students being involved. And we looked at research terms. So, for example, they preferred the term African as opposed to Afro. I tried to understand the different types of curls as well. And I involved them in piloting the mixed method study. So the research project, I won't go into too much detail because of timing, we'll look at understanding students' current knowledge of providing hair care for textured hair, and then bringing the barbers and hairdressers in to deliver simulation. And it's not for nursing and midwifery. This goes beyond that. It's for AHPs, it's for social workers, health and social care students. And who knows, in the future, perhaps we could have, we should have tools that, hair tools that for coily textured hair as well. So what have I learned about inclusive research? Well, experiential knowledge as an academic is really important because your experiences shape who you are. But it's also important in terms of how you are inclusive as a researcher as well. And inclusive research is not just being tokenistic and using your participants to get the data. It's about doing your work with the people. And do consider small advisory groups for guiding of cultural relevance and terms, for example, as well. Be inclusive in your recruitment strategies. Again, in my doctoral study, ensure you are providing that accessibility and options for your participants. Membership validation or member validation is really important. Go back, take your findings back, ensure that the essence is coming out in your findings, and share your findings in accessible format. So I did like a pictorial representation of my findings, and include your participants in dissemination. And really importantly, you do not have to be in a research role to be involved in research. And I'm going to stop there and just share a picture of two of my student nursing associates who are now academics. And we did a joint conference together, sharing new roles or nursing associates in higher education. And again, it's about working with people. And I'm going to stop there, but share that there's an inclusive, being inclusive in your research webinar by NIHR. Thank you very much. And I'll stop sharing as well if I can.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation, Eliza, particularly around the importance of doing inclusive research, which is a core theme of our webinar today. I can't see any questions at the moment, so we'll if anybody does have any questions, we'll hold off until the end for those. I'll now move on to our panel discussions. So Hannah, Ellie, Roxanne and Dorothy, great to have you join us today. Thank you so much for your time. I'm delighted to have you with us. If we can perhaps begin with a bit of an introduction to the panel, just for some context, so the audience knows who you are and what you do. So if you could please tell us a bit about yourself, your role, and what research ethics and inclusion means to you, that'd be great. So Hannah, if I come to you first, and then we'll go to Ellie, Roxanne and Dorothy.
Hi, so I'm Hannah Cadogan, and I'm the lead nurse for lived experience at the Royal College of Nursing. I have a number of kind of hats. So I am actually a palliative care nurse, but I also have severe mental illness and was out of nursing for 13 years because of severe mental illness, and have very much been part of research studies. And so I'm very sort of passionate about how participants are looked after, how exactly what has just been spoken about, how actually we're worked with a lot more in how research happens as kind of service users, and the importance actually of that voice and the unheard voice, which we don't always have in our line of vision. And actually how we sort of realise that we don't have that. So that's why I'm quite passionate about this sort of inclusion of people being part of research.
Thank you, Hannah. Ellie?
Hiya, thanks for that. I'm Ellie Gordon. I'm the Senior Nurse for Learning Disability and Mental Health in the National Nursing Midwifery Team at NHS England, and I also I volunteer for the Royal College of Nursing as part of their Mental Health Forum, which is a special interest forum in the college. I think it's a really interesting question because I have to say when I even think back to being a student nurse, I remember really clearly being told that you can learn lots of great things from the textbook, and that's absolutely lovely, but actually it only ever comes alive when you talk to that human being and you start to hear from them. And I think even back then, it was a long time ago, I have to say, those beginnings of how you're more inclusive about your patients, there was still a core element of, I think, parental authority-led, you're the one with the expertise, that's what it's all about. Now, thankfully, that's changed massively over my years as being a nurse. And I think as the profession's changed and as we've changed, And as we get better at going, actually, if we don't include the people we're working with and caring for in everything we do from the outset, then honestly, what's the point? Because they're the people who should be informing this work, because we're doing it for them, and we therefore should be doing it with them at every stage. If we don't do that, then really we're not going to benefit anybody, because we don't know what is needed that benefits those human beings. So it kind of almost feels like a no-brainer when you start unpicking it, but I would say it's taken a really long time for our profession to even get to this point. I still think we have a really long way to go in terms of what I would call proper inclusion. So real proper, right from the very beginning, when you're even thinking about a piece of work, how do you involve those really important people? Please don't wait till you get to the very end and you go, oh, we've done it now. Maybe we'll just run it past somebody and see what they think. It's all called inclusion, but obviously means very, very different things. I think the longer I do this, the more I go in. Hannah knows this, we work a lot together, the more I get passionate about how do you ensure it's proper inclusion. And I won't go on about ethics because I'll go on forever. But again, I think there's that real big question of ethics, certainly in mental health nursing, because you have such a massive power imbalance. It's really easy to think that you're working in an ethical way, but actually forgetting you have a lot of power over that human being. So you have to really be incredibly careful that if you're doing research with that person, how do you really flatten out that power imbalance? And if you can, be honest about it and be honest about the fact the imbalance remains. But then at least you're both moving forward in as an informed way as you can. So I think, yeah, it's really fascinating. I could go for hours and I'm going to stop at that point.
Thank you so much, Ellie. Roxanne.
Hi, thanks. I'm Roxanne Crosby and Wilby. I'm an ophthalmic nursing professor of ophthalmic health and care at Moorfields Eye Hospital. I also have roles at the NIHR as a senior program director and lead nurse for research at Moorfields. So great question about ethics and inclusion. And I think I want to bring forward the word justice, because we tend to use, the terms autonomy, so getting consent, maximizing benefit after research, minimizing harm to the patient. But what about justice? So I think we need to start asking the question from the get-go: who's missing in our research? Is the design inclusive? Do we have borders around it? Are we just collecting data? Are we curating data? And what is the participant actually getting out of this? And I think if we keep justice at the center of all of our discussions, we will then hit the parameters for ethical and inclusive research.
Thank you so much, Roxanne. And Dorothy?
Thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, my name is Dorothy Upara. I'm an associate professor of nursing at University of West London, and I'm also the professional lead for children's and learning disabilities nursing. I did my PhD where I was looking at the roles of learning disability liaison nurses who are working as acute liaison nurses in, in hospitals. I think I'll kind of touch into it a bit later on. What does ethics and inclusion mean to me? The way I look at ethics, it's the way we do things. It's not just completing a form and then seeking approval. It's from the moment you ask the question that you want to ask. How are you asking it? Who are you asking? All that, for me, that's ethics. And most importantly, it's about values, particularly because of our nursing background. So I see ethics, directly linked to the values that we have, as a profession. And on the other hand, we also have the academic side of things. So we also have academic values. So all that come into ethics, and also social values as well. And most importantly, because of my background in learning disabilities, I agree with what Ellie has been saying as well, to say we need to include people with learning disabilities in research, and not just tokenistic, roles where we are ticking a box to say we've included people in our research, but meaningful inclusion, meaningful roles that we'll be giving them. And there are certain things that we need to be doing to ensure that they can be included. So for me, that's what, inclusion and ethics mean when it comes to research. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. So apologies if I look like I'm looking away from you. I'm just looking at the list of questions that we have to cover. So the second question is around working with vulnerable populations and researching sensitive topics. So as nurses and midwives, our research often involves working with vulnerable and underserved populations and researching sensitive topics. What do you consider to be our key responsibilities and priorities within this space? So do feel free to come in when you're ready.
I could start because learning disabilities, yeah, we're working with vulnerable people. I know every participant is vulnerable, but when it comes to people with learning disabilities, I would say probably there's an additional line of vulnerability because of the communication difficulties and some of the difficulties around understanding information to do with the research process, or even understanding what is it that the researcher is trying to get out of this particular process. So for us, I think our role is to ensure that we've supported them to understand why the research is happening. That's the first thing. And secondly, to ensure that we are using strategies that will ensure that they can access, the information that we're dealing with, or the processes that we're following. So we need to think about, easy read, not again just in a tokenistic way to say we've just put keywords and say that's what it is, but more of making it, broken down and following the right processes and using experts in that particular area to ensure that information is broken down, and also educating them about what we're doing so that they can see the value of what we're doing and what are they going to benefit from the research process. Both the times, again, we can involve people, but they don't understand what are they getting out of it. So if it's going to improve access to services, or if it's going to ensure that we've got improved policies, if it means that we are going to understand disease progression better. So we need to be informing them about those things so that they can, participate in a full manner, and also just ensure that they're protected throughout the process. Like what you said in the introduction, to say people have got the right to withdraw. So again, all that needs to be made very clear for them to understand, so that they can engage with the full process, and also signposting them to the right services to support them if they get distressed or if they need, additional support. So that's how I see it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. Roxanne?
Thanks, Ada. So I'm not the expert on these adults that you were mentioning. However, I wanted to probably challenge us on the use of the word vulnerable. And I just heard this recently that the same way we've shifted away from using hard to reach, and now we use underserved, should we replace vulnerable with underserved? Because vulnerable, again, is a deficit model that's putting the blame or the deficit or the harm that can happen on the individual. And probably they wouldn't like to identify as being vulnerable themselves. So should we still adopt the word underserved, knowing that we are underserving them? Just a question to ask, really.
Thank you, Roxanne.
I think that's a sort of like fair point, isn't it? We sort of make assumptions about people, don't we, in terms of it. But I think some of it is realizing that there is about options, though. That actually there can be difficulties for people to be part of research. There can be barriers, however those barriers have been created, and how do we ensure that we can hear voices through those barriers? And it might actually be the way the research is being done. So, for instance, we had the example of arthritis. People actually, in the mornings, it was hard in the morning, so it's better to do it in the afternoons. People might not be able to access things like questionnaires. They have a different way of communicating. I actually heard of something which I thought was wonderful. There was a group of Black young men who really couldn't engage in therapy, and they've actually started doing a rapping therapy group where they rap because that's how they express their emotions. Actually, do we reach out and say, okay, well, we want to talk to you, do you want to rap it? Are we flexible in the way that we work and try and get those voices to make sure that it's comfortable for people? Because sometimes we do focus groups, but it might not be comfortable for some people. They may prefer to do a one-to-one. So I think there's something about how do we open up options when there can be, or however, whatever reason those barriers are there, whatever words we use, there are barriers, whether that's vulnerable or they're underserved. There's these barriers, and how do we break through those so that we can really hear people's voices? Feels kind of an important part of making sure that people are part of the work. So.
I was just a really quick 10 minutes after 10, but I think as well, I think it's an important point I think Dorothy was making as well about giving people the chance to withdraw, because sometimes somebody can participate in a study and think, oh yeah, fine, I'm happy. And then for whatever reason, it starts to get a bit tricky for them. So many, many years ago now, I did a small piece of research in a medium security, which is a very English term, but basically it's almost like a locked ward where people are there usually because they've been diverted out of the criminal justice system, so into hospital, but through the courts or through the prisons. And the people I was talking with have been in that unit for many, many years. And I was talking to them about addictions and dependence on drugs, thinking, oh, well, all that have gone. They've been here for years. They won't have any issues with craving drugs or anymore. But I found that by asking those questions about past drug using behaviour, really started to bring up a lot of that thought and a lot of that emotion. So what I found I had to do really quickly was not just ask the questions, but then spend a long time afterwards sat with that person, holding that space and going, okay, so I now need to sit with you because I've brought all these emotions up for you. How do we then help you deal with that, address that and move on? And do you still want to do this? Because actually, this is bringing a lot of negative memories back that you might not want to talk about right now. So I think it's so important that at each point we just keep checking in with that person and checking that it's still okay. And then we're not bringing up any past negative emotions or thoughts. And if we are, we take responsibility for that and do what we can to help that person manage that.
Thank you. All really great point and so pertinent to discussions. I've seen a couple of questions in the chats. So one question was directed towards me, but I'd be really interested to hear what the panel think as well. So the first question is, how do you navigate the ethical tension of dual relationships, where today's participant could be tomorrow's patient without collapsing into overcaution that stops the research happening? So I realised that question was directed towards me, and I'd say, well, actually, we navigate these people, places in everyday life as well. We could bump into a patient in the supermarket, for example. So thinking about, I think I'd go with, well, how does the participant or patient feel in that situation, and recognising that our roles change as well, especially when working with people with long-term conditions. But I'd also like to open that up to the panel as well.
I think roles are much more flexible than people. One of the things that I often think about, we think of people always just being participants of research, and actually there's much more of a change of people becoming part of research, becoming researchers themselves. A bit like Ellie was saying, essentially this is humans, and I think we've got that them and us, haven't we, rather than we're us. And as a nurse, who became, a patient and has come back to a nurse, and now a kind of nurse and a patient, it can happen to anyone. What point do we just see each other as humans, and we're trying to do something together and understand things together? And one of the things that you do find, I think, or what I particularly with lived experience researchers who've got lived experience of a certain healthcare condition, they can be really great in creating a safe space. So talk about that safety, because if somebody says to me, I know I've been sectioned under the Mental Health Act, I'll be like, all right, you get it. And then I'll open up. So the fact is that we can see that these roles are much more, see them as being defined, but that they're not actually. What you find is if you have somebody in a role who understands lived experience, you might actually hear some of the voice that hasn't been heard because people feel safe with them. So I think there's much more of an ebb and flow. And I think we need to sort of work with that and not put people into boxes and think that people can't do things. I think it should be much more together, which is essentially more that kind of co-production way of doing something, that we all have something to give. And it's vital to be able to have a much more rich piece of research.
Brilliant, thank you. Just looking at the time, we've got just over 10 minutes and we've got quite a few more questions. So let's try and get through as many as we can. So the next question is directed towards Roxanne. So Roxanne, you named justice as the missing piece in research design. How do I build justice explicitly into an NIHR application, not just as a value statement, but as a commitment reviewers will recognise?
Yeah, thanks, Samuel, for that question, and great that you're thinking about it at this stage. So what the NIHR does really well is the research inclusion document, and the RSS, so the research design service, or the research support service, does give funding, small grants towards PPIE, but that sometimes tends to be just at the beginning of your research. And if for whatever reason you don't continue that particular research project, that PPIE group may or may not die. What I would advise you to do is, even before, at the beginning of the inception of the idea, that you've got the idea, find the patients that matter, find the people that matter, lived experience, who has any clue or idea about a particular topic, and engage them from the start, such that if your idea doesn't get through the first time for funding, you can go back to them, look at the application, build on it. And what you're doing there is creating a community that has a live idea, an iterative process that you'll be able to have throughout the life of your study. And using that information, the second question you then asked is, how do you transition into a competitive NIHR grant? The NIHR particularly looks for three main things. They look for your mentorship, they look for you as an individual, and they look for your settings. So if you're not in a setting currently that has a really strong R&D, try and link up with someone in an R&D service who has that strong setting. There's lots of people on NIHR community. You can go to your RRDN. You can go to your health and care director. Also mentorship. So whilst your supervisors locally might be great, and the best thing since sliced bread, what they really want you to do is to network nationally. So you could email me at srl.nihr.ac.uk. We can put you in touch with our senior research leaders up and down the country. There are lots of different networks, but they really want to see that networking feeding back into your project. And then you as an individual, what courses have you attended yourself to build yourself as a researcher? So it's the person, it's the place, and the people that's influencing you. I hope that's a comprehensive enough answer. Anyway, email me and I'll tell you more.
Thank you so much, Roxanne. A further question is, how do you deal with therapeutic misconception in research? And that's a question to all.
Because I'm trying to understand what therapeutic misconception is. Right? I'll answer what I think is the question. Maybe that's the way to do it. So I'm thinking what the question is. Is it that you're doing a piece of research and maybe that piece of research has some therapy in it, and then the boundaries, I could see how if you're doing that, the boundaries could easily get blurred with, well, I'm doing this piece of therapy as part of the research, but actually the therapy I'm doing the rest of the time is something completely different. And I can imagine, or it could be that I suppose that trying to understand what you're doing isn't therapy, it is research. And I'm trying to ask the question, I'm confusing myself. So I can imagine it's very easy to get confused between, well, hang on a minute, I spoke to you yesterday and we're having this conversation. I'm now speaking to you today and we're having a different conversation, and I'm getting a bit confused as the participant as to which conversation we're having and what about. And I suppose the way to deal with that is, I think, certainly as mental health nurses, I think we're very good at taking the time that's needed. And I know that's not always possible, especially if you're working in a busy environment, it's really hard. But for me, I would think it's about being really clear and really careful with that human being about what therapy is for what purpose. But I would hope that whatever therapy you're using, be it for your research or whatever's in the rest of the environment, that you're ensuring that with that patient, each bit of therapy is beneficial. And if either stops being beneficial or causes any concern, then you just stop it. And I'm not even sure I've answered the question correctly. And I really hope I've kind of given something helpful trying to wade my way through that one.
Ada, I'll just jump in. So in my research, what I tend to do at the beginning during the consent process, obviously, you go over the information sheet, but I clearly tell the individual, I am here as a researcher asking you questions pertinent to this research. However, and I do share my escalation protocol. If at any time, you feel that you need to step away or it's bringing up something that you can't deal with, this is our protocol. You could either speak to me, so then I let them know I will switch my researcher hat to my clinician hat, or I can refer you to someone else if you don't want to speak to me, who is also ready, available, willing, and skilled to deal with you with that particular aspect of that role. But it's clear, and I always send out, I call it my distress protocol, with my information sheet to all my participants, so they know exactly who I am, and I might be switching, but this is my code switch, and I will let you know when I'm code switching.
Thank you so much, Roxanne.
Can I
So-
just quickly add before we move on, to say that also it's important as researchers to ensure that we gain informed consent from our participants, because if they're coming in with misconceptions from the beginning, that's when we will end up in this in a situation. So again, I'm thinking of those groups. Maybe they don't use English as their first language, so you're beginning to think, what am I doing to adapt my communication to ensure that they, understand what's going on? Or if it's again people with learning disabilities, again, what have you done to adapt your communication to ensure that they understand what the research is all about, so that when they are consenting to go ahead, with the research or to participate, they truly understand what the process is all about. So for me, again, I think it starts right at the beginning to say, are they giving informed consent?
Thank you. So we'll move on to our next question, which is, within a complex adaptive system, how can PPIE, so patient and public involvement and engagement, be understood as a dynamic, evolving process rather than a fixed methodological requirement? Some really great questions here. Shall I repeat the question again? So within a complex adaptive system, how can PPIE be understood as a dynamic, evolving process rather than a fixed methodological requirement?
So I think I kind of alluded to that a bit in my response earlier on. But with PPIE, the same way, I don't know about you guys, but I tend to have my most brilliant ideas in the shower. And you can write something down now and you submit it to ethics or to NIHR and you think, oh, I should have added in something, I should have done that, I should have gone. And this project will haunt you until you get the feedback. So the same way with individuals, they'll tell you something now, but they are human. Something else will change in the next 24 hours and in the next 48 hours. So you keep in that constant dialogue with your patients, with your participants throughout the research process, because whatever you've written today will definitely, I guarantee you as a researcher, change tomorrow, because we are all human. So you build it into your process. You have check-in points with your PPIE group. Is this question still the same one we want to answer? Is this the new evidence? Should we change anything? Do we need to go back to ethics? It's a constant process because we are always evolving, and that's how I treat my my PPIE group. That they are with me on a journey, and we will arrive there together.
I think it goes back to that, something about it being with and not to, that actually you're doing this with people. And once you change that way of thinking that you're doing it with, you don't actually know what will be, exactly what Roxanne is, you don't actually know what will then be created. Because just because somebody might have a long-term condition does not mean that they don't have skills. And they don't have things to bring, and they don't have ideas and thoughts, or even how you can reach out to communities that you're not reaching to. They might have ideas and thoughts of how to do that and might be able to easily do that. And I think it's that just not being rigid about how you see people's roles and what people can do and what people can achieve, moving away from that, just people being participants. And then even I thought it was lovely about how we were told people actually going to conferences and things being co-facilitated at conferences, and the research being shared in that way, just to show that this isn't about, it's trying to move away from some of those power dynamics, the kind of us and them, we're the researchers and you're the participants, to the fact that it's much more shared, and actually, you know, people can think, oh, that's not a very good question that you've got there. You know, we need to sort of see it differently. But even I've been involved in a lived experience group, and you know, the ethics committee was worried about our group and whether our group should be there. They didn't come and speak to us. They didn't come to speak to us about how we felt about it. They basically, behind our backs, without us knowing, were questioning whether our group should even exist, which actually made me think that, do we actually need lived experience on the ethics committee? Which would then also be a kind of, you know, again, that much more weird, because it really sort of did surprise me that they were questioning whether our group should exist without even talking to us.
Hannah, you're absolutely right. Apparently, we do have lived experience on our ethics committee. I question whether it's the right individuals or what you tend to fondly call expert patients, because them being there for 2, 3, 4 iterations of the research committee, they almost sometimes, I think, become institutionalized themselves into the NIHR or whatever funder's way of thinking. So we need to change people a lot. I mean, I had a doctoral student doing a really great project looking at the access to breast cancer services for South Asian Muslim women. And the kind of things that the ethics committee accused her of, when she obviously had so much co-design and actually the participants leading it, they just didn't get it. It was their own misconception of hierarchy and what Muslim people thought when they had no one actually feeding into the ethics committee process. It was crazy, and we got through it. But you're absolutely right. We need to influence not just people on this call, but the people who are judging their applications as well. And the way we do that, guys, is to become reviewers ourselves. The NIHR has a lovely website calling for lived experience individuals, researchers at any level of the research journey, to become reviewers yourself. So please sign up.
Thank you, Roxanne. If you could please post that link into the chat, that would be most helpful. And on that note, we are about time. We are about time to close. But I wanted to thank everyone so much for your presentations and the panelists for answering all the really complex questions as well. We can see through the conversations that the ethics process is complex, it's messy. We can try our best to prepare for all of these different eventualities and plan ahead, but actually there's things that always crop up that might be unexpected as well. So thank you all so very much. I very much look forward to seeing you next time for our next webinar for research, and we'll post more details about that shortly. Thank you all. Bye for now. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.